Amari Cooper is a Buffalo Bill. Are you buying him in your Dynasty leagues? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. And it's a Wednesday episode, so of course that means Matt Williamson is here. Follow him on Twitter at WilliamsonNFL. We had a bunch of things happen in the NFL on Tuesday. Let's break it all down. Matt, let's start with Amari Cooper being traded for the Browns to the Bills for a third-round pick. Just big picture. Are you buying Cooper with the Bills?
Sort of. I definitely think Buffalo is the best landing spot for any potential wide receiver trade, to land. I mean, Adams would have been ideal to me, but Cooper does the trick. They've been really hurting for a man coverage beater, a true X receiver, a traditional do the dirty work type of guy. And you watch Cooper, and much like everything in that Browns organization, he seemed disinterested, not real excited to be there, not playing particularly well. But I do think this is a shot in the arm for him, for the Bills, for your fantasy team if you have him. I don't know that it's a long-term, great situation, but for the rest of the year, I think it helps you win. He's probably a wide receiver too. I also find it kind of interesting, it's sort of a side note, that he has publicly said he's not real big on playing in the cold, and he goes from Cleveland to Buffalo. He goes from Cleveland to Buffalo. I mean, like the only place that might be worse, so he's been fine in that situation, but I guess it's not his bag. He's a Bama guy, whatever. I understand. So, yeah, I think if you own Cooper, you're happy about it. I'm not all of a sudden selling high. I think he'll help you win this year. But after that, it's to be determined or, dump him.
Kate, what are your thoughts?
I really like the fit, and I'm going to be honest. I don't know really what Amari Cooper is at this point in his career, right? He's in his age 30 season. Like you said, Matt, just kind of appears disinterested. But I have to imagine that this is going to be, a much more exciting situation for Amari Cooper than it has been over the past 2 seasons where he's dealt with very poor quarterback play. He's got a 65% catchable target rate over the last 2 seasons. That ranks in the 14th percentile for wide receivers per PFF. If 65% of my targets were catchable, and essentially rendering almost a third of his targets as totally useless, that's going to be pretty frustrating. That's going to be down for morale. I think morale is just down in general in Cleveland because of the quarterback situation, because of the obvious decision that they have to make that they are not making. I think this is going to be a great situation. I think it's going to boost Josh Allen's floor significantly. But I do think that this is a great opportunity. If you have Amari Cooper on your roster, he's going to be a contributor. He's, I think, an every week start. And then let's say you're not a contender. Like, this trade couldn't have done more for his trade value in the current market in dynasty leagues.
So, Matt, I'm going to just give you a little bit of a data dump because I covered Amari when he was with the Raiders and then obviously when he's with the Cowboys. So I happen to know him pretty well. I'm going to give you just a bunch of random factors and you tell me if this makes you more excited or less excited to buy Amari. Okay. First of all, you're right. He hates the cold. Like, he's openly admitted that he does not like playing in the cold. That's
Buffalo is a perfect place for him.
Right, which is why I thought the trade initially to Cleveland was going to be a weird one because you're playing most of your games outdoors. I believe for his career, he averages 61 yards outside per game, but like 88 inside. And that's why you saw him with the Cowboys play really well. he is somebody who needs to be invested in the team in order to play well. Like, you can see his effort level and his ability to care depends on whether he thinks the team is good or not. So I do think going to Buffalo is going to help him, but he's got a foot injury that he's needed surgery on for years. Hates surgery. He does not want to ever get surgery. So he's playing on a bad foot. And I think you see that at times. He's also a player that I think
real quick. I
Yep.
mean, I've been told, and you're kind of insinuating this. He seems like he's beat of his own drummer. He's kind of a different,
But he's incredibly smart. Like, he is so intelligent, but he's a different dude, right? The other part of it that's interesting to me, Matt, is that I've always pictured Amari as a guy that you put him in a timing-based offense, he's going to look awesome because he is an excellent route runner. That's not really Buffalo, right? Because Josh Allen likes to extend plays so much. So after all that information, does that make you more excited to buy him or less excited?
Well, certainly less. A bad foot, doesn't like the cold, kind of an odd dude, not timing-based offense. You didn't give me any good
To be
news
fair,
there.
but
Cleveland's pretty cold.
Right.
Cleveland's
But
pretty cold as well.
But if he's invested on a good team, he can look awesome. Absolutely.
That's where I was going to
take over games.
Like, I'm going to trust Allen and McDermott and just getting out of maybe the most toxic environment in the league to at least kickstart him emotionally, psychologically for the rest of the year or until the Bills are eliminated. So again, I'm going to stick with what I said, that he'll help you win now. He's useful, but like Kate mentioned, if you're out of it, dump him, because his stock is high. I don't know. This is a long-term, wonderful dynasty thing, but it's good for the rest of the year.
And Matt, I do want to point out, like, the second half of last year when Joe Flacco came in, Amari was awesome. And again, I think he thought that Browns team was really good. I remember the game against the Texans that he had late in December where it was like 230 yards and could have been an even bigger day. Like, if he feels like this is a good team that can maximize his opportunity, I wouldn't be surprised if he looks like the Amari Cooper from old.
Yeah, you mentioned the cold, the foot, the timing-based offense. All those things are negatives for this situation. But if he is incredibly smart, like you said, he had to have realized we had no chance here. Cleveland's a nightmare, the biggest nightmare of all. I'd rather be a Raider. I'd rather be a Patriot, anything.
Yep.
Because there's no long-term help because your quarterback doesn't care and he's just eating up your whole cap. I mean, this has to invigorate you. It has to.
Kate, before we go, if you need wide receivers in your dynasty league, what's the most that you would be willing to flip for Amari Cooper? Again, this is like a 1-year rental, like we talked about last week, but what would you flip for Amari?
Second round pick?
Matt?
Yeah. What about a young receiver? Like, I'm not giving him a Conky.
No.
Leggett or...
Would you give up Keon Coleman?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, it's all these are team, construction and record dependent. But yes, if I'm 5-2-ish,
if I'm a contender with Keon Coleman, I'm totally fine doing that trade.
Okay. All right, let's talk about the other wide receiver trade that happened on Tuesday. Davante Adams landing with the New York Jets. What does his dynasty value look like, and how much does this hurt Garrett Wilson? We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals that you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In any given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in award winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks. I absolutely love PrizePicks, but there's one of the reasons I love them so much is that I can play it in almost any state, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. Plus, PrizePicks is the only real money daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy, so your lineups stay in place even if one of your players gets injured. For example, I had Chris Olave last week in my lineup. I thought Spencer Rattler was going to get him the ball. He leaves the game early with a concussion. But the good news is my lineup still stays live. It's the only real money daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Download the PrizePicks app today and use promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are discussing the biggest news coming out of Tuesday, which was a wild day in the NFL. Now, let's talk about Davante Adams. Gets traded from the Raiders to the Jets. He is expected to play against your Steelers on Sunday Night Football. First of all, what do you think about this fit back with Aaron Rodgers?
I think it's great for the Jets, and I think they have the best skill position players in the league now. I also think it's somewhere between an aggressive and desperate move. I mean, they are playing the Steelers, so I have a massive deep dive this week on the Jets. And anyone knows this, but they're on a 3-game losing streak. It's been 13 years since they've gone to the playoffs, which is by far the longest streak of any team in the league. And even going back to the offseason, I thought this was the most fragile roster in the entire league. In it to win it, old guys, see how long you can hold on. But if everything hits, maybe you could even win the Super Bowl. Well, I don't know about that anymore. I mean, that was, July observations. And I think this is all coming from ownership, that we have pushed all of our chips in the middle to win this year. And frankly, if they lose the Steelers, they could be out of it in a weak AFC already. I don't quite understand it from a big picture perspective. And I don't know that we've gotten any information on Adams' contract past this year, because he is a $35 million cap hit or something crazy like that. Yeah. They have to cut him or restructure or something. I thought that might already happen, but heck, I thought that was going to happen with Riddick when they traded him from the Eagles, and they still didn't restructure him, and now he's looming out there. I don't think it's a great landing spot. I'd have much rather he landed in Buffalo. I'm not sure if Pittsburgh or Baltimore would have been better, but just the fact that Wilson is there, who has the most targets in the league, the second most receptions in the league, I just don't know if the pie is big enough for everybody to maintain their value.
Kate, what are your thoughts?
Here's the thing. I don't know that like Garrett Wilson is even a factor in Aaron Rodgers' brain. You said you didn't really get the trade, Matt. I'm going to break it down for you. Aaron Rodgers is
one of them.
Aaron Rodgers is calling the shots here. He says, I want Davante Adams. You get him Davante Adams. He says, I want Alan Lazard. You say, how high? Like, It doesn't matter. I think everybody
Randall Cobb's next, and Jordy Nelson.
Cobb, like Marquez Valdez, imagine, just released by the Buffalo Bills following the trade of Amari Cooper. Would you be surprised if he ends up in this offense? Like, Aaron Rodgers just wants familiarity, I think. And we know we've talked kind of endlessly about how important trust is for Aaron Rodgers specifically. He loves a guy that he can just throw up the ball to, and he knows is going to come down with it. I don't think that, despite Garrett Wilson being one of the best wide receivers in the National Football League, I don't think he's necessarily found his way into Aaron Rodgers' inner circle of trust. He might be in most quarterbacks' inner circle of trust, but we know Rodgers is kind of finicky. So while this raises the floor for, Aaron Rodgers, I can't imagine that they would cut him after this year, even with the contract situation. They're going to figure something out because Aaron Rodgers is there through the 2025 season. I don't think there's a situation where Aaron Rodgers is going to be like, yeah, cut my boy.
Unless he retires.
Unless he retires.
Or hosts Jeopardy, or runs for president, or
Totally fair. I think that this move kind of sucks for Garrett Wilson.
Yeah.
In the immediate future, I think at least over the next 2 years, I have to project him as more of a wide receiver too on a weekly basis. One that is incredibly talented, a top 5 wide receiver in the National Football League, has top 5 upside any given week, but kind of hard to bank on that when you know that there are 2 other players that Aaron Rodgers has already built a better rapport with than him.
So, Matt, here's my read on the situation. I still think Garrett Wilson is going to be the down in and down out wide receiver 1, right? He's going to do a lot of the heavy lifting on this offense because I don't think Davante Adams can do it at this stage of his career anymore. And he's not really that type of receiver, right? He's not the guy that you're running the screens to. He's not the one that you're giving a bunch of these touches where, hey, go make a play after the catch and get us into second manageable. So I still think he's going to get his targets. But I think Adams is there for basically the Mike Williams and Allen Lazard targets where, hey, it's 3rd and 9, and I'm going to throw you a back shoulder, and I know you're going to be in the right spot. Like, it's not going to be the way it was 2 weeks ago when they played Minnesota where they're running a back shoulder fade. Mike Williams doesn't know where to be and where the ball is going to come. And I don't think you're going to see the double-digit targets for Davante Adams every week, but it's going to be 6 to 7 high leverage targets with Garrett Wilson being the still de facto number 1 receiver. Do you think that's how it's going to play out here?
I definitely agree on Mike Williams becoming obsolete or going to a different team and everyone else falling down the pecking order. And I think you bring up good points. I mean, I definitely think the high leverage situations favor Adams, red zone, 3rd downs, those type of things, the back shoulder fades, all that stuff. And I bet it doesn't take long until they get there. But I kind of side more with Kate than you in terms of where these guys are in terms of dynasty value. It sucks for Wilson. That's my in conclusion, it sucks for Wilson.
Let's talk about his dynasty value. So in our latest batch of ADP from Dynasty League Football, Garrett Wilson was wide receiver 16. Now, again, this is before the Davante Adams trade. I want to talk to you about some of the guys that are being drafted behind him and tell me where you think Wilson slots. So Tyreek Hill, wide receiver 17.
I think I still go Wilson.
Okay.
17 seems low to me still, just because of his talent.
Okay.
But I don't know who his quarterback is next year or, the future is very murky in New York. Gotham.
I'll still take Wilson.
Okay. A couple other receivers behind Garrett Wilson. Brian Thomas, wide receiver 18. Rome Odunze, wide receiver 19. Drake London, wide receiver 22. Any of those guys you're taking over Garrett Wilson now?
London's a tough one. I was going to bring him up if London's ahead or behind Wilson because I think he's the clear number 1 with a lot of quarterback stability. I like his situation a lot more, and I'm a London believer. So I would take Wilson over all those guys. London's a tough one for me.
Kate?
I would take Wilson over all those guys except for Drake London.
Okay. One more interesting one, Matt, that I want to throw at you. Zay Flowers is wide receiver 25. He just had a career game against the Commanders last week. I'm assuming you're still taking Wilson over Flowers?
Easily. And that's on a knock on Flowers. It's just he's a much better football player.
Much bigger, can handle more targets, I would assume.
Yeah. And I think that's not a one-off for Flowers, but I don't think they're in the same tier.
Okay. All right, I want to talk about some other receivers that are a little bit disappointing after the first 6 games of the season. Let's talk about Jaxon Smith-Njigba next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. We've got an outstanding week of NFL action coming up. We get a Super Bowl rematch with the Chiefs and the 49ers, but the 1 p.m. Eastern time slot is fantastic with Lions, Vikings. We got Texans, Packers, Seahawks, Falcons. I think is going to be a really high scoring game. So go make a parlay. Go pick 3 of your favorite games. You're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets after you make your first $5 bet. That's on FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Again, FanDuel.com. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. For your second listen, go listen to the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. 1 in the morning with Tyler Rowland, 1 in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins. Go support them because their teams are awful right now with the Titans and Jaguars. Feel bad for those guys. But as somebody who's covering the Cowboys, I actually don't feel all that bad. I get it. 2 shows every single day. Go follow them wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. All right, Matt, let's talk about some receivers who are struggling a bit right now. Let's talk about Jaxon Smith-Njigba, who is playing more, seeing more targets than we saw last year, but still not producing the numbers that we'd like to see. Are you concerned about him moving forward?
The biggest thing that concerns me with him is average depth of target is just so low. I mean, it's hard to rack up yardage. I don't know that he's ever going to be a phenomenal after the catch guy, but he's not being used downfield at all. And the other 2 receivers are much better than at that. I wonder, though, like, trust me, we've talked this to death, and we just talked about 2 receivers that got traded. On my Steelers show, we're always looking for what receivers could the Steelers get or what receivers could move. Is Seattle a loss or 2 away from dumping Lockett? You know, that would open up a lot for him. I could see that being in the equation, but their protection, their line is really the root of the problem to me.
Yeah. Kate, what are your thoughts?
I mean, yeah, definitely disappointed in JSN's production to this point, like kind of across the board. There's nothing that you can really say. Obviously had, 1 solid game where he was playable, but guess what? You didn't start him in week 2 because he was so disappointing in week 1. I think what we're kind of looking at is a guy with maybe some more value in full PPR leagues, at least for the time being. But again, even if they don't move on from Tyler Lockett in the immediate future, I have to envision that like eventually Tyler Lockett will phase out of the offense, right? Like he's an old man.
Hope. Yeah,
you would think like,
Yeah.
and so I keep holding on to this idea that like, yes, DK Metcalf looks like the clear cut wide receiver 1 for this team. But I mean, Tyler Lockett, he's 32 years old, right? And he's still producing, but like, how long are we going to bank on that before we start to turn the page, right? To this former 1st round pick who has the pedigree, has the track record of production. Like, I'm still holding on to this pre-draft evaluation.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm going to panic. I mean, that's the title
I'm
of the
not
segment.
panicking yet, but I am a little concerned. I want to run through a bunch of names. We can go through a couple of these quickly. Again, I know that's early for some of these receivers, but a lot of times what we see in the first 6-8 games ends up telling us the story for these guys. Adonai Mitchell for the Indianapolis Colts. He's played all 6 games, 79 yards, despite running a bunch of routes. Are you concerned, Matt?
I hate the situation because he's 4th on the pecking order,
Yep.
and I really like the guys ahead of him. And I think Richardson's accuracy situation is terrible for all of them. You know, I mean, like Downs goes down a peg from me from Richardson to Flacco. You know what I mean?
Kate.
I'm maybe also just kind of sticking to my pre-draft biases. Not a huge AD Mitchell fan. I think a lot of the, problems we've seen in his game to this point this year were also issues in the pre-draft process. Like he's a big man, but doesn't always play like he should, or you would think he would with that kind of build and that play strength. It's just not there. And I think generally speaking, you're going to funnel this offense through Michael Pittman. You're going to funnel it through Josh Downs, and AD Mitchell is going to be this guy who has this big play threat, but not necessarily a fixture within the offense on an every down basis.
All right, last one here. Tank Dell. And this one really hurts me to say because I love Tank Dell. He was a top 20 dynasty receiver for most of the offseason. He is now down to wide receiver 32. On the season, 20 catches, 194 yards, and 1 touchdown. Matt, are you concerned?
Not really, but I think he's probably 90% of the producer I thought he would be or hoped he would be because I really like the player. I thought Diggs would kind of fall to clearly being number 3. That hasn't happened. I always thought Nico was going to be the 1, but I didn't think he would be maybe the best receiver in the league. You know what I mean? So not super concerned, but I drop him down a peg.
Kate.
I'm not panicking just yet. And I kind of have like maybe this is a conspiracy theory, or maybe I'm reading too much into it, but is there a chance he's just kind of still getting back into this conditioning following
For sure.
his
Well,
broken leg last season? Like we saw
that
with
was
And he got shot.
yeah, and that was going to be my point is physically he doesn't look like the same player. Now,
Yeah.
is he going to get back to what we saw last year? I hope so, but like I thought last year he looked like one of the most explosive players in the league, and he still looks athletic, but the juice is just gone right now.
Yeah, and I think
Agreed, yeah.
again, having had a lower body injury, right? Like this is you know, you might be back on the field, you might be medically cleared to play, but that doesn't mean that your leg is at 100% back to, the same muscle mass maybe that we saw in previous, in his rookie season. Maybe
Yeah.
he needs a little bit more time. Again, we saw it, not exactly the same injury, but Tajay Spear or Tony Pollard broke his leg, and it took him some time before he really felt like he was 100%. I think he said like around 11 weeks of the regular season before he really felt like the player he used to be. Maybe that's something similar that, we weren't factoring into the overall projection for Tank Dell that we need to be more considerate of.
I also think there's less room for error with recovery when you're 160 pounds. I mean, just it's not like you can get by with You can't lose any of it, and it's just a smaller body, I mean, all those things. What body part got shot? Do we know that?
I'm sure we did. Quad, I believe.
Okay, it's something leg related though, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well that I feel like we've kind of solved the problem. So I'm going to go send a bunch of offers for Tank Dell.
I just hope that he can get back to it, right? Like, is it where you have two bad lower body injuries and you're not able to get back to that? I'm hoping that's not the case, but I do think we should at least give him a little bit of leeway here, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Matt on Twitter at Williamson NFL. You can follow Kate at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus _Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.